Hello, and welcome to I Remember When, sponsored by the Gresham Historical Society. I'm Gwenda McCall. You know, it never ceases to amaze me how many marvelous senior citizens we have in East County community. And when I go looking for a guest for this show, I have so many marvelous people that I meet, and tonight's guest is no exception. This gentleman started teaching in Gresham High School in 1929, and he has some terrific information for us, including how the Gophers got their name. I'd like you to meet Harold Weber. Harold, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Gwen. It's my pleasure.
Well, don't keep me in suspense. How did the Gophers get their name?
Well, there's a rather odd story there. It was a time when most of the schools began for the first time to name their teams. And at that time, Minnesota, the Golden Gophers of Minnesota, was the great college team. They were the most successful team in the United States. And so, the only thing that's odd about it is that probably nobody in Gresham High School had ever seen a gopher. It's not...
Moles.
Moles,
but not gophers.
But not gophers. But it had nothing to do with that. It was the fact that the Gophers were the big college team, and that's why they started in with the name Gophers. They already had the name Munhinotu, which puzzles most people. It sounds like an Indian name, but of course the Munhinotu was a short for Multnomah Union High No. 2.
And that's the name for
and
their
that's
annual.
the official name of the high school. And at the time that I came here, first instructions I got is never call this Gresham High School, because it had just been united and the other districts didn't like it that it was called Gresham High School. At that time there was feeling against it. Mm-hmm. So you were supposed to say Gresham Union High School or just Union High School.
Now we're talking about 1929. Let's
Right.
get a picture of you. Just finished college, 1929. Now tell us how you came and how you ended up in Gresham and how you got your job here.
Well, as the picture might show, I wasn't an old man when I graduated in college. I was the youngest member of the class of 1929 at Oregon State. And the first place that I applied and told them I was 20 years old, they said, no, we're not having any teachers that are teaching our high school girls at age 20. Oh. So the second place was Gresham, and I thought I'd better change my tune a little bit, and I told them I was 21.
You fibbed.
Yes, I'm afraid I did.
Oh, no.
It didn't really, well, only two times when it was embarrassing. In the fall of the year when I came, there was a school election. Of course, all the teachers are expected to vote at the school election, and actually I wasn't old enough to vote.
You were only 20.
And how I got around that, I can't quite remember. But I got past that, and I was going easy until it came time for retirement. But the year before I retired, the principal said, according to our records, you're 65 already, and I had to dig out my birth certificate in order to stay another year.
And admit that you fibbed.
I'm afraid so.
Oh.
That's when it first came out. But actually, they weren't hiring teachers at that time without experience. And the only reason that I got in was because they really were in need of a band instructor, and so they made an exception and let me in without experience.
But you taught other things besides band.
Yes. Actually, while I was known as the band instructor, one period a day for music. The other periods I taught science. Mm-hmm. That one period was 3 times a week band and twice orchestra. Mm-hmm.
And did people get credit for their music?
No.
No credit?
No credit at all. It was just an activity, but it was done during school time.
Let's show a picture of the first band group that you had in 1931. And is this fellow with the bass drum, is he the one that you had the story about that was with you for 6 years?
Yes. This was, Jack Deaton was my bass drummer for the first 6 years I was there, which is a story in itself because Jack was a smart young boy and a very nice boy. The teachers enjoyed him, they liked him, but since he never turned any work in, it was very difficult to pass him. Things were kind of strict. And
so that's why he was around for 6 years.
So he was around for 6 years. When he finished school, he went into the Army. He sent me a list of his grades, and he was from school, straight A's.
Oh,
he found
bless his
himself
heart.
and was just going great. 2 years later, he was dead from getting spinal meningitis and just like that.
And you said you played at
That's
his
the
funeral.
hardest job I ever had, was playing for his funeral. He was ill.
Oh, I guess. After all those years of teaching, you have
Yeah.
some stories. This picture, well, go ahead and tell us what this picture is.
Well, this was a picture of the entire student body in 1929 when I came. This was the old high school, and the whole student body was 452 kids. That included everything in East Multnomah County, outside of Park Rose and Corbett. We ran buses in as far as 82nd Street, all over, to pick up kids. Over half of our student body were students from outside of the high school district. They were tuition-paying students.
Oh.
They could go anywhere they want to, but since we furnished the buses, they came here.
Mm-hmm. Let's see a picture of the buses. And these were old timers too. This is from the 1930 Munhinotu. And the top picture is the same picture we just saw, but the bottom picture are these buses leaving. There were quite a few of them too.
Well, we hauled, as I say, we hauled in most of our students.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the old Ford buses with a Russell axle. And part of our job, see, the teachers, well, my starting salary was $1,260 a year, but we also drove buses, and we got a little bit of extra for driving the buses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's interesting too, because all of the men teachers drove buses to increase their salary, but of course, nobody would consider letting the women drive buses. And the other thing that they had a complaint about was since the men were off driving buses before school and after school, all the work of looking after the students fell on the women teachers, which they didn't get paid extra for.
Oh, that doesn't seem fair at all.
It was very fair in those days, but not now.
Now, I see that the kids look like they're all leaning out the windows here. How are the seats set up on these buses?
Oh, instead of seats crossed this way, there were long seats lengthwise with the bus. They sat on either side of the bus.
And
they were narrow, very narrow buses.
And they faced each other
Yes.
then? Oh, for heaven's
Right.
sake. You had, let's see, I was thinking you had another story about the buses, but you did tell us about the teachers, how the women teachers didn't get as much pay, but there were some other rules that the teachers had to follow in those days.
Of course, one of the questions that was on the application blank for all teachers at that time was, do you smoke? And if you put yes, why, you weren't considered at all.
Is that right?
The teachers were not allowed to smoke, and they had to live in Gresham. They were supposed to, nothing written in, but were supposed to trade with Gresham merchants, of course, and be part of the community. No extra work for directing the band or anything in the evenings or Saturdays or anything like that. No extra pay for anything except coaching.
Is that just coaching? Now, you said your starting salary was $1,260. That's all take home.
Yes, there was no income tax to worry about and no Social Security at that time. So actually, the first year I taught, I saved a bigger percentage of my salary than any year ever since, I think. Of course, I was unmarried. At that time, there were only 2 teachers on the faculty who were married, and all the kids, there were no apartments or anything like that around. The teachers stayed in a room in someone's home. And you didn't go to Portland very much unless you had a car, and I didn't have a car. There were no bus system. If you wanted to go to town, you caught the trolley, which
is down by Main City Park.
Right, went over to Oaks Park and caught the Oregon City line on in. So I was working hard, and I saved so much money that when the next summer came, I really blew it. I bought my first car for $425.
$425.
A used Chevrolet that I bought for $425, and I got married.
Big summer.
That wound up the money.
You had a funny story about the check that you wrote for the car.
Oh, it was kind of interesting. Of course, $425 might not seem like very much, but I don't think I'd ever written a check. I know I'd never written a check that big before, so I was being a little nervous. I wrote $425 up here, but I wrote $4 and 25/100 down below. Now the interesting thing about that is that it was a small town. Everybody knew everybody else's business to a large extent. The banker, who was a friend of mine, knew I bought a car. The check was illegal, but he put it through.
Oh, on his own word, they put it through.
He knew I'd bought a car. He knew I made a mistake. He kidded me about it, but they put it through. You can imagine a thing like that happening
Nowadays,
now.
they'd call you for sure. But, oh, that's funny. Now, let's go back. You mentioned you got married in the summer of 1930, and we have a picture of you and your wife taken about that time. How did you meet Nella?
Well, I met her when we were both working down at the Oregon Caves. It would be very impolite then to say that I've found my wife in a hole in the ground, but we were both working at the Oregon Caves when we met. And about 3 years later, we were married.
Oh, for heaven's sake. Now that we're talking about your personal life, let's go back a little bit in your own history. I have a picture of you and your two older sisters.
Well, one of them's older and one's younger.
Oh, one's younger. Oh, I'm sorry. And then you had a little brother come later.
That's right.
But
he was about 8 years later.
I especially like this picture because of the dresses that the girls are wearing. It really sets us in time, about 1910, 1911, 1912.
Around about 1912, I expect that picture was taken in Brownsville, where we lived.
Oh, in Brownsville. Now, you were telling us how Brownsville got its name.
Well, Brownsville is the third oldest town in the state of Oregon, and it always seemed a little bit like home because not only did I go through grade school there, but my parents both went through school there.
Oh my.
And later my dad was mayor of the town, and it was pretty much like hometown. And my great-grandfather on my mother's side was one of the early founders of the town. He put a ferry in across the Calapooya River there and called it Kirk's Ferry, which was his name. When it got the time to name the town, they flipped a coin to see whether it'd be named after Kirk, my great-grandfather, or Brown, and Brown won the toss, so it was called Brownsville.
Oh, for heaven's sake. And you mentioned that your dad was a principal.
I never went to a school till I went to college that my dad wasn't principal of.
Oh. This picture just delights me. This is a picture of you and the other children in the orchestra, and you must be about 8 here. Here you are in the front row with your coronet.
I'm a little past 8.
A little past 8.
I was in high school, so I should have been.
Oh, this is a high school picture?
That's high school.
Kids look younger all the time, huh?
No, it's not a high school group, actually. I never went to a school, grade school or high school, that had any music. But this was a little orchestra we had in the town of Harrisburg where I went to school, and it met once a week at night. And we're sponsored by the artisan group there, and that's a high school.
Okay. And you told me that you felt that you were a pretty good horn player until you got to college.
I was the best one trumpet player in the orchestra, so why should I practice? And I didn't very much. But when I got to college, where they had some good players, I found out how lousy a trumpet player I was. They just barely let me in the band. If they hadn't, I'd have probably given it up.
Is that right? But then you continued it in college.
Oh, yes.
This is your album from college. And there's some delightful pictures in here, but I singled out just a few. We'll see a picture of you as a high school senior here, and we will highlight you, but you're right in the center, in the center row.
That was our high school graduation class, 12 people. Rather odd that out of the 12 people who were in this graduating class, incidentally, that's my father right there.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Just to the right of you.
Yes, I was right here. And 2 of us later both taught in Gresham High School out of the 12.
What a small world.
Yeah.
And then another picture that just delighted me was the bonfire. Tell us about this. It's not burning yet, but they're building a monstrosity here.
Anyone who went to college at the time I did would recognize pictures like that. Colleges in their homecoming, before their homecoming game, would all build one of these big bonfires, which were tremendous things, and they would touch them off at the night rally before the game.
How tall would you say this thing is?
Oh, that is about 18, 20 feet high.
Well, they must have used a senior engineering student to put that thing up, because I can't imagine how it's even standing. It's just a bunch of garbage wood all stacked up there, isn't it?
Trucks went out all over the country to pick up stuff for the bonfire.
dangerous. I bet they don't do that nowadays.
No, they don't.
And this is an interesting photo of you with the cadet band, 1928.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about
Well,
this.
it was a cadet band. It was part of the ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps, in the college. And it was a cadet band. And we made trips through, in spring vacation, we'd make a trip once to California, once over into Eastern Oregon, once to the coast, and once down the Columbia River in a boat. And we'd always make that trip. First time I was ever in Gresham was on a band trip with the band there.
So you'd already checked it out when you came to Gresham to apply for that job.
Right.
And these look like regular Army uniforms.
Oh yes,
to
it was
me.
part of the Reserve Officers Training Corps.
Okay. Let's get back a little bit to the to your years at Gresham High School now. How many years were you in the Gresham High School?
I taught there for 40 years. And
40 years.
I had the band for about 27 years. I quit in the middle 50s took a year off, and went back to for my master's degree in counseling.
Oh.
And came back as Gresham's first full-time counselor, and really started the counseling department there. So I was head of the counseling department for the rest of my years there.
You were there so long, did you ever get to the point where you had grandchildren of children you started with?
About the last year or two, somebody said, you know, my grandmother used to go to school to you, and I thought, boy, it's time to get out of here.
Aww. That just shows you're a good teacher. They remembered you. How are students different now than they were when you remember them?
Well, I don't know that the students themselves are so much different, but the school was different. It was a different type of community. It was a farm community. There was more established home life than there is now. The home was a bigger influence. The big thing is, I think, that the ones who were poor students, not really capable of doing schoolwork well, would probably repeat a year or so down in grade school, and by the time they got the 8th grade, they'd drop out.
They wouldn't even
So
go
they
to
never
high school.
came to high school. Nowadays, you have students coming into high school who they've just been socially promoted and haven't passed a grade since the 3rd, 4th grade.
Well, they do have minimum grade requirements now. I think they're trying harder to try and catch those kids and help them. But
not to get into high school. You can get into high
Yeah,
school
you're right.
if you're breathing.
Okay. And how about the teachers? How did you feel their jobs were different then than they are
Well,
now?
teachers were a little closer together socially because of the fact that only 2 of them were married.
Oh,
So they
sure.
naturally came together, and we had more teacher activity, and I think we knew each other better. It was a smaller group. There were about 18 teachers when I first started teaching there, and there wasn't so much change from one year to the other. They stayed pretty close, and so it was a little different.
Did they have more authority, do you think?
Oh yes, that's the other thing I think that made teaching easier, is that it was taken for granted that the school had authority to do things. Teachers had authority in their classroom. The principal had the authority to run the school. For example, if they thought kids weren't dressed properly for school, they just said, you'll either dress this way or you can stay home. The parents might not have liked it and might have squawked about it, but nobody took you to court or anything like that. You had authority to do those things.
And what about at basketball games?
Oh, the things like sportsmanship, which kind of disappeared with pro ball coming in on television. I think the kids learned poor sportsmanship from watching the television games, really, because in the early days, if you happened to boo the referee or anything like that, you were asked to leave the game immediately. If the yell leaders would cooperate with the teachers in trying to keep the kids perfectly quiet when somebody from the opponent's side stood up to shoot a foul shot, give him his full chance. Nobody make any noise during
Silence.
that time.
Like golf now.
Yes, it was really more good sportsmanship, I think, than there is.
I noticed, talking about basketballs, that the scores were so low in the
Well, that was
Munhinotu.
because of the center jump. Basketball was a different game that time. After every basket, you went back to a center jump.
Oh, that takes so much
made
time.
Well, it was poor. It took up a lot of time, And then you had to have a tall center because the center jump was so important. And so you'd have probably 4 good players and a tall kid who maybe couldn't shoot at all, but they'd have to have him in there for the center jump.
For that one thing. And what about school dances?
There weren't any.
Oh, there weren't any?
No, it wasn't allowed. It was probably the middle part of the 30s when it was brought up that we should have high school dances. There was a public meeting because there was a lot of objection to it, and at that public meeting, which I'll never forget, there was a lot of very harsh accusations from both sides. It was a very unpleasant meeting, big turmoil, and at the end of that meeting they had a school board meeting, private, and decided not to let them dance, which was the only thing to do at that time. If they had said then, yes, we will let them dance, some people would have moved out of town. There would have been friction all over town on it. About 2 years later, with no trouble, they just started dancing, and it was all right.
They just moved into it naturally.
You've got to bring new things up properly, or you can't crowd them.
Timing is everything.
Timing is everything.
All right. And what about the Depression?
Well, when the Depression came along, it changed life for everybody and the school as well. They learned about the Depression pretty early. In 1932-33, they collected all their money from selling student body tickets, put it down in the bank, and a month later the bank went broke. So they passed the year broke, and they found out what it was like. The Munhinotu that year, which I think you showed a picture of in an earlier show here, was really a magazine describing the events. There were pictures of the seniors and a couple of group pictures of teams, and that was all the pictures that were in it, not even pictures of the teachers or anything. It was
really skinny that year.
It was a skinny.
I guess all the banks folded in Gresham during the Depression, didn't they?
Well, yes, there was only one, so that was all of them.
Oh, there was only one then. Oh, gosh. Well, that's a good
There was
reason.
only one, and it folded. So they immediately soon after started another one, and it folded.
Oh, my. So finally they got one in here, and then it kept going. What about female teachers during the Depression?
Well, not only in school, but in other jobs too. If your husband was working, it wasn't right for you to work. And so women teachers who got married were dropped immediately.
For heaven's sake.
That was not just this high school. I think it was pretty general around at that time. And it was approved because of the scarcity of jobs.
Just to
In
spread
fact,
the money
a
around.
lot of the teachers worked at one cannery, which was the only place that would hire them, because most people said the teachers teach in the wintertime and they don't have to work in the summertime. Other people need the jobs worse. But this one cannery would hire us, so we worked there. They call it the teacher's cannery.
The teacher's cannery. Now, the picking berries, it did have more to do with the Depression too, didn't it?
When I came to Gresham, the whole town revolved, all activities and everything revolved around the cannery. It was the big business. Berries were the big business, and the cannery was it. We started school earlier than other schools so that we could get out early so they could pick berries and work in the cannery.
Berry season.
Work in the cannery. Incidentally, I forgot to mention at the time that Gophers was selected, the principal thought it would be much better if we had something that fit the community, and he suggested that they call their teams the berry pickers, which didn't go over very well with the kids.
Not berry
all.
pickers.
I
It's
can
not very
imagine
glamorous.
how pleased they'd be now if they still had the name of berry pickers.
And the Rose Festival came around
Well,
that same time.
the cannery was so vital, and when it was going strong, it was the big thing. We couldn't go into the Rose Festival. There were too many kids working in the cannery, and they couldn't get the day off.
Oh.
In fact, if there happened to be just a big rush, I remember one year when 2 or 3 of the seniors missed graduation exercises because they wouldn't let them off from the cannery where they were working. It was vital.
Oh, but they graduated. They just
Oh,
missed
yes,
the
they graduated.
ceremony.
Yes.
And you couldn't take the band into the Rose Festival because of the
Well,
cannery
it
jump.
wouldn't work.
We have some more pictures from the Munhinotu. Let's go ahead and look at these. Here's a picture of the school before the big remodel. Now tell us about the big remodel, and then I'll show a couple pictures
Well,
here.
the school got too crowded, it was time to build a new school. There was a lot of argument because some people said we're taking all these pupils which don't belong in our district and educating those. Tell them to go someplace else and don't build a new school. The argument from the school was we're gaining money by these people coming in. It doesn't cost as much to educate them as the tuition they're paying. They'll help us build a new building. And then, of course, with the WPA, we got the best bargain that ever happened. And they were going to remodel this building. When they got into it and found out how rickety it was, they tore the whole thing down, rebuilt this. This wing was left standing. The gymnasium was widened but left as it is, and then they built the auditorium over here.
Right where all those trees are.
Right. And because of the WPA, which paid for all the labor, some of the extra things that were put in, artistic little things, would not have been in there if it hadn't been for the free labor, because the labor cost on them was immense.
Now this is the front of the auditorium, right?
Yes, this is in the construction stage there.
And this is from the 1940 Munhinotu.
1940s when they were building there.
And here's the front of the gymnasium going up with the carvings on the front too.
One of the things that's still in the building there is a big plaque in which etched in marble in this plaque, which at the end of a hall down there, is the whole history of Gresham High School before 1940. There's little portraits etched in marble of the early buildings. There's the name of the administrators and the school boards from way back up to 1940. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. It's interesting to me because I think I'm the only person alive whose name is on that plaque.
I wonder if the kids even notice it when they're in the building during the day.
They notice it, but they don't look at much, I don't expect.
Oh, gosh. Let's see. We have some more pictures to share. Here's one I like. 1931 on Main Street.
Yes.
This is quite close to where you lived with Nella, too, isn't it?
When we first were married, we lived, there was a big house which they made into an apartment right where this cherry tree was there. We had 4 apartments in, and we lived there for 6 months when we were first married.
Harold, it looks like we're running short of time, and I'm really sorry to cut you off because you have so much information here for us. I really have enjoyed having you come and spend this time with us. Now, you retired from school teaching, and you now have a senior orchestra. Tell us about that.
Well, when I retired, I started this little seniors orchestra down at the Gresham Senior Center, and we started with 6 people. Now we have a 45-piece orchestra, and we play a lot of concerts and enjoy playing very much.
That's marvelous that you stay so busy. And then you also directed the Shriners Band for about 8 years.
I directed the Shrine Band for 8 years, and I'm still the assistant director, and we'll play a concert with them Saturday.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on I Remember When. I noticed that when we look through these annuals, there are many names like Tanaka, Fuji, and Shiki, and come 1942-43, you won't see those names in these annuals. Our next guest will tell us more about why not. We will see you again next week. Thank you for joining us. Good night.